Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. A really warm welcome to all of our viewers. We hope you and your families are safe and healthy in your homes, and enjoying this beautiful Saturday afternoon. We're certain that just like us, you've had a lot on your mind since the outbreak of the pandemic. Things continue to evolve and change so rapidly that it can feel really overwhelming sometimes to keep pace with the moving tide. We may not have answers to many of the issues out there, but we would like to discuss an area that we feel we may be able to help, and that's education. My name is Atika Sayyida, and I'm the Financial and Development Director of Sana Trust Foundation. Sana Trust was founded almost 10 years ago by Rehan Mirza and myself, along with our board, in an attempt to answer a very important question for our newborn child. What should be the model for his education? We have come a long way since then, and we've been very lucky enough to find a lot of answers to those questions through the course ever since. However, in our pathway, we have also learned that new questions come up along the path because nothing remains the same. Our focus for today's program, and we're really happy that you've joined us, is going to be to answer a few questions and find some clarity about the future of education amidst the pandemic. More specifically, today, we'll focus on our anxieties about schools reopening in August 2020 and what will going back to school look like and mean for us and our children. I'm really happy to introduce our guest speaker for today, Rehan Mirza. Rehan Mirza is an organizational psychologist who earned his master's degree at the Teachers College, Columbia University in New York. He also completed 2 years of clinical neuropsychology at Nova Southeastern University. He's the founding executive director of Sana Trust Foundation and has played a pivotal role in its development, progress, and growth over the past decade. For those who may be new to the work of the foundation, we do encourage you to learn more by visiting our website at sanatrust.org. So without further ado, let's invite our guest speaker to that conversation. Assalamu alaikum, Rehan. Welcome to the first webinar. So today our theme or our conversation that we'll be having today is named The New Normal in Education. And the first area that we would like to focus on and begin this conversation with you today is the response of families and educational institutions during the COVID-19, whether they were prepared or not prepared. So my first question to you is, it appears that many educational institutions were not prepared to deal with the reality of this pandemic. Why do you think that was so?
It's a good question. I think, to be fair to all the organizations out there, including Sana Trust Foundation, I don't know how many were truly prepared. I think even if you look at the federal level and obviously the local level. But what my perspective on it is that to be certain there are things that are going to happen in life, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught us that we will not be prepared for. But as one of my teachers said, is that when those moments do happen, you prepare your heart. And so if we kind of extrapolate that and look at it in terms of organizations, one of the things that I learned in my academic studies and even in some of my sacred science studies is that one has to be prepared for the moment, not necessarily the exact moment that is at hand, but certainly have certain qualities and characteristic traits. And so that's where I think we have some work to do as organizations. And I think that one of the things that is talked about when you study organizational psychology or just leadership or business management is just organizational culture. And I think that oftentimes, what happens is we establish these organizations and habits begin to form and get established. And then, as Weber says, they become routinized and eventually lead to a bureaucracy, which is not in and of itself bad, but certainly habits that become rigid can be problematic. And I think that that's what we found when the pandemic happened. We found that on a federal level. We found that even with our local public institutions. You look at public schools, for example, they were very struggled. Private institutions were very much struggling. Small businesses, and the reason for that, one of the reasons for that, is because we like individuals, organizations also establish habits. And just like individuals as well, organizations sometimes can establish those habits to meet subpar standards that are just happen to be working, because it quote unquote works. But organizations are living, and they need to grow, and they need to evolve, and they need to be able to adapt. So I think that one of the biggest challenges that should have been identified for organizations and leadership of organizations is that the rigidity, I think, that was established over so many years. And I think that needs to be looked upon and see how that can be a little bit more malleable, a little bit more living and more adaptable, because it should be. And that's the way that any agile and forward-thinking organization, I think, needs to be going forward. And certainly there isn't much of an excuse now to not reevaluate kind of the bedrock of an organization and see how they can improve, what went right, what didn't go right. And so yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
Okay, great. So based on some of the things that you said, I want you to talk a little bit more about what were some of the gaps that during the pandemic. What we saw a lot happening was that as a result of this pandemic, what began to surface was some of the gaps in the structures and systems within our institutions. So I want you to spend a little bit more time helping us understand what were some of the gaps that you recognized in response to this crisis, and how did your own organization manage them, and how do you think other organizations may have been able to manage them?
I'll answer your question in two parts. One is with relation to kind of the more obvious gaps. I think there are gaps in technology for a lot of organizations, across the board. I mean, the conversation today is kind of centered on education and Islamic institutes, but really these are principles that I think apply to more than just that. So I think technology, for example, if you look at public schools, they were struggling, not so much in having technology at hand, but the delivery of that technology. So there were long lines of students outside of their schools on the weekend, picking up laptops and things like that. So the delivery was kind of an issue there. For many private schools, right, just the technology itself was an issue, not having it. Not having students familiar with interacting with it or using it as part of their education curriculum, et cetera, I think that's one part. I think also communication both internally within organizations, from leadership to teams, and from teams back to leadership, and then also from within the organization to the people that they serve, whether it's parents and children and families, or clients, or if you're a business. I think there was kind of a hiccup there. I think also to go back to my earlier point in terms of organizational culture and design, a lot of times organizations, particularly nonprofits, if we're having a discussion related to nonprofits and Islamic organizations, sometimes their design is flawed. It's not set up to handle external stress. It's not set up to handle immediacy or urgency, because there's heavy-handed board of directors, or just like I said, cultural habits that are established over time that make it a very, very slow-moving organization. Everything has to go through a hierarchy. Everything has to be approved by people who are not on the ground, and I think that leads to a lot of delay and adverse effects as a result of that delay. I want to add something to that also, with your permission, something that, from our Islamic tradition, one of the things that you see in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is that every phase of the evolution of Islam in terms of its growth from the cave of Hira until the last breaths of the Prophet, peace be upon him, there was an evolution and a growth, both in terms of leadership style, in terms of developing the team around the leadership, and in terms of just also what the organization, if we talk about Islam as an organization, what it needed to do and what it was able to do, and balancing that. And you just see a nice, very deliberate, deliberate and well thought out plan of action. And I think that, organizations need to be able to learn from that, particularly Islamic organizations, that, it begins with really open-minded and adaptable leadership. It begins by developing a team. It begins by also always inhaling and exhaling. I always like to talk about organizations being living organizations. And I think when you're living, then you can really be very self-aware and perceive, threats and perceive responsibilities and capabilities and things like that. So it's kind of a little bit of an esoteric answer, but I do think that one of the gaps, quote unquote, in terms of the soft areas is just really what is an organization, what is leadership, and what are the responsibilities of organizations and leaderships. I think we need to kind of go back to the drawing board in some cases and redefine that. And really, we don't have to go far, because we can look at the tradition and we can look at the prophetic example and prophetic character. And then when I say team, the companions, the men and women around the Prophet, peace be upon him, and how they were developed and how the organization grew and did more. And when it needed to do less, it did less. But it was a breathing and living organization, and that leads to success, particularly when it's coupled with humility and sincerity and the other things that our tradition teaches us. But it is easier said than done. But I believe that that's one of the gaps. I think one of the other gaps, if you permit for me to add, is also, I think that we saw perhaps not a very complete definition of what it means to be a teacher or a place of education. I think parents for the first time were able to see how the organization their child interacts with, i.e. their school, how that school or that learning institute defines what a teacher is, right? And then based on that, how much the teacher was giving of themselves or not. And also how much, what the definition of a teacher was for the teacher themselves. And I think it was a really good opportunity for parents to kind of see that. So that gap, I think, was evident for some parents and children, and perhaps in a positive sign, it was not as evident, meaning that the delivery of education and what the teacher was expected to give and gave met or exceeded their expectations. But from anecdotal evidence, what we've learned is that, I think parents were for the first time aware of some gap there, on what their definition of a place of education is and what a teacher is and what the institutes or institutions was or the teacher themselves. And so that's.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up question based on what you were saying, actually. So this is with regards to, many families may have their children attending a public school. Other families may be having their children attend a private school. And then there's also a further division between private schools, which may be faith-based, and those that are not faith-based. So do you think an organization is there a divide and a line in the way an organization responds to crises or a difficult situation if they have a clear association with faith? Does it matter? Does it not matter? Because you have many organizations that are very maybe very professional and equipped to deal with crises and do crises management. So again, basically trying to see and understand, does faith play a role in our response?
I think it does. I wrote an article about this. I think it's on MuslimMatters.com or on the opacity of Muslim-led organizations. And the article argues that there should be a higher standard for Muslim-led organizations, particularly because they should be inspired by faith, right? And the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam of Iman, Islam, and Ihsan. And to just pause for a moment on Ihsan. Ihsan is worshipping Allah as though you see him, and if you're unable to do that, then to be very cognizant and aware of the fact that he is ever watchful over you. And I think for an organization, particularly Muslim-led organizations, they do have a higher responsibility. And so how does that look in a pandemic or a moment of crisis? First of all, right, there shouldn't be panic, because we should be the first of humanity to know that everything is under the control and power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there should be that centeredness, right? That an organization, a Muslim-led organization should have, or really a faith-based organization should have and could have, that they be centered, that they have a degree of istiqamah, and they have a degree of reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that, right, we're not moved by the markets, right? We're not moved by our stock price going up and down. Everything is by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether it be a microscopic virus or something larger than that. So I think it's a good question, and I think that so many times Muslim-led organizations have so many of the answers in their tradition, but a lot of times we look at the template that's been presented by secular norms or through academia, and that's fine. Those are inspired. I think those are really intelligent forms to look at, but we always need to infuse it with not necessarily Islam, so to speak, but with the inspiration of a faith-based inspiration, and in our particular case, it's Islam. And so I think when organizations, particularly Muslim-led organizations, just look at the template and just carbon copy it without understanding that those have not really been inspired or not have kind of divorced themselves from faith-based principles, then you lead to moments of crises for even Muslim-led organizations. And they may think that they've established themselves on well-established norms, on academic literature, on best practices, and things like that. But what they've neglected is, unfortunately, keeping that all, having that all be guided by faith. And I think that, to your point, is that, yeah, I think there is a greater expectation. And I think that there is a greater need that can be met as well if faith-based organizations cling to their faith. As the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, in times of crises, and in particular, he was alluding to the end of time, we have to clench onto our faith. And it's not just, it's not a statement of just blind belief and just holding on to faith without any rational thought, but it's meaning being firm, being steadfast, having istiqamah, and being very grounded in your faith and grounded in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, I believe that organizations that are faith-based, particularly Muslim-led organizations, should have manifested that, and I think inspired the community. And if they're learning institutes, then really settled students, settled their staff, settled the parents, and everyone that they interact with. They could have been kind of that bedrock for children and families and their team, and I think that comes from faith.
Thank you so much, Rehan. So we're going to move on right into our next section. So the next section we would like to focus on is the road forward. Is uncertainty the new normal? So we want to think about the future expectations, given the context, given the fact that there's a lot of anxiety and uncertainty about the pandemic still. We don't know if it's over, and we don't know when it will be over. So given this uncertainty, what do you feel? So the question is, what lies ahead for schooling after the initial pandemic outbreak, in your opinion?
That's an excellent question. I think it kind of leads us to a place that I think we should go, related to families and children. My personal opinion and professional opinion, from my organizational psychology perspective, is that families should really take advantage of this opportunity. Like that, the cliche is that challenges are just opportunities. I do believe that this is a great opportunity for families to do a hard reset. A hard reset on what is education, what is knowledge, and what is the path to acquisition of knowledge. And I think a genuine conversation for a family with children, and or even without children, is that it begins with the adults in that family, right? The mother, the father, the husband, and the wife. What does knowledge mean for them? What does education mean for them? The Prophet ﷺ told us to pursue knowledge from cradle to grave, even if we have to pursue it to the ends of the world. So even as adults, we should be doing a hard reset on what what do a lot of things mean, to be quite frank with you? I mean, I know you asked about schooling in particular, but I think doing a hard reset on just our value-based system. What does earning income mean, right? What does work mean? What does my time mean? What does my family mean to me? What does spending time with my family mean to me? What does, the economy had to redefine work, right? Governments had workers working from home, and every other company had people working from. So every industry is kind of reevaluating and redefining itself. My hope would be that in terms of what lies ahead for schooling after the initial pandemic, is that we place a greater degree of burden on families right now. And I would say that what lies ahead and what lies first is that families reevaluate, what does education mean? What does schooling mean? And having those conversations with themselves and with their families. And I think what we will find that in the pandemic and these last few weeks and months is that really there should have been a little bit of a greater expansion of our definition. I've sat in front of people who are worth tens of millions of dollars, and their definition of schooling for themselves and their children was SAT score, and and getting into a prestigious elite university. Some people have the right to their opinion, and we respect everybody's opinion. But I think that if we were taught anything during the pandemic, we were taught that, well, not that necessarily that's not important. It's debatable, But let's say, for example, that remains important. I think certainly it's undebatable that a lot of what would be termed as insignificant or inferior to that, or maybe the soft sciences, some people might call them, became paramount and became critically important. So what does that mean? Our definition of schooling now must include how do our children cope with stress, right? How do they understand crises? How do they understand death? How do they understand the role of God in relation to the world, right? And a pandemic or some type of tragedy or global epidemic. How do they understand God's role in that? How do they understand their faith's role and how to cope and understand that? How do they cope with death, right? We had people in our own personal circle dealing with these types of issues. So if that's not part of your definition of education, knowledge, and schooling, then I think, unfortunately, we still haven't learned the lesson, because it's just as, and in my book, honestly, more important than an SAT score is a child learning how to cope with moments like this. Because the reality is that these moments can impact everything else in a child's life, right? These are moments and it is, right? There are students who have been practically impacted by COVID-19 pandemic that are graduating from home, that didn't have an opportunity to take the SAT, that maybe have put their job options, they're in limbo, or really what school they will go to is in limbo. So all of that, right? If we put all of our eggs in the basket of SAT score and getting into an Ivy League university, when it gets shaken like it has, then what's left, right? How is your child going to deal with moments of uncertainty? And that comes from, expanding our definition of schooling. So honestly, I think what lies ahead, we shouldn't even look too far ahead, because I think for many of us, we need to redefine what does schooling mean, where our child is going to be educated for 7-8 hours a day. What are we hoping that they acquire there, right? And if it's just an SAT score and getting admitted into an elite university, then when things like this arise, that constricted definition comes back to bite us, and really is a disservice to children who have such a great potential and are resilient and have so much more than just cramming for an SAT score and getting into university available to them and to offer the world. So I hope that, in terms of what lies ahead, that people begin by doing a hard reset on their definition of schooling, education and knowledge in general.
Thank you so much, Rehan. That was a little bit heavy. So on a lighter note, I do want to bring to surface a concern, even me as a parent. Like I have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, and a lot of what you said actually can be really overwhelming, even as an adult, right? To kind of take in and understand, and then let alone try to explain that to a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old. So what is the responsibility of the parent then? Let's say that a parent or both parents are inspired as a result of the environment and the circumstances as we have right now, not just with the pandemic, but so much socio-political unrest that's happening in our country. Let's say that you are inspired and you do want to see a change. So I'm going to go right into my next question. What will that change look like, and what needs to change for parents, institutions, and more importantly, how do we help our children see that change, make it easy for them to adapt to that change and according to their age level?
Yeah, I think honestly, I'll use the tail end of my last answer to answer this question. I think, one of the things that I remember a teacher was asked one time, how do we teach our children, very young children, about Allah? And he said that you teach them by them observing your relationship with Allah. So them witnessing you praying, them witnessing you reading the Quran, and them witnessing you making dhikr. So in terms of how do we teach and communicate things that we're learning in these moments to our children, I believe that was the nature of your question. I honestly it begins through observational learning like Bandura, and I think the most important thing that children can see in their parents is a moment of pause. I think it's one of the most profound lessons that a child can learn from a parent, is seeing them be introspective, seeing them be composed, seeing them be giving value to a moment. And what I mean by this is that, as adults and as parents, we are just as much influenced by the society and technology and things like that. And in this 24-hour kind of news cycle, and 24-hour, really it's beyond 24 hours. You can do multiple things within 1 hour. So there's multiple streams of 24-hour technology and entertainment consumption that's available to any. And you'll literally see, a child or a parent on multiple devices at one time. And so I think that it's an extraordinary disservice to our own intellect, right? And it's one of the strategies, in my opinion, of modern society and really Shaitan's efforts, is that we've mistaken information with knowledge. And now we just consume information, and we really acquire very little knowledge. And knowledge is much more of a deliberate action. Knowledge is a much more, it can be a much more slower process of acquisition. And it certainly is very hard to do parallel, right? Unless you have some profound intellect, parallel, streams of knowledge at one time. And so I think, to answer your question, it's kind of like you would almost not believe the answer, but I do believe that it's a very, very important answer. And I would say maybe a part of the answer to your question is that every child should have witnessed their parent some point in this past few weeks have a moment of reflection. And a parent should have been reflecting, and so I believe, and I think, like for my own children, they saw more than one moment of that. That you reflect on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's jalal, on his grandeur, right, and his magnificent, and that's something that's very profound, right? So what does a child learn in that? They learn that in moments of crises and in moments of major life circumstances, that you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And I think that's a very important lesson. If they only learn that you turn to the news, or you turn to this cable news, this internet site, and you just regurgitate information from social media, if they've just learned that that's what you do, that you get hyperactive and you get You increase your consumption of technology, you increase your regurgitation of information and erroneous facts and things like that, and have tense and just muddled conversation over dinner. If that's what they've learned, then that's what they've learned. But the reality is, what we do need to communicate to them, what we do need to educate them on, is that we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we're reflective, that we deliberate, that we consult with our spouses, that we take information from valid and reliable sources and what we need, and not necessarily more than what we need or more than what we can understand. I believe that's kind of how we begin teaching our children, is that there should be a moment of pause, that there should be a moment of reflection, that there should be moments of consultation, that there should be moments of prayer, that there should be moments of strategizing, that there should be moments of filtering beneficial knowledge from knowledge that is not beneficial, and not over consuming information. Because I think, unfortunately, right now we're in society with this, like I said, 24-hour news cycle, where it's just that people are invited to do that, and it's a very easy door to open, and we end up just sitting around listening. And I think that what does it teach kids? It just teaches kids that in moment of crises to panic, and that's not what our Prophet, peace be upon him, taught us, and what our tradition teaches us.
So it seems like you kind of are making a recommendation for parents to not just incorporate some balance in their life, but really essentially calling them to kind of unplug, or to be really aware, self-aware for when they need to unplug, and then likewise set that example for their children as well. And that's a very important point. I'm just going to piggyback off of just that one point, and then we're going to move into the last part of the conversation. But just based on that, I, as a parent, also have a concern now. If you're asking me to unplug, and not that my kids are plugged anyways, then that obviously places a lot of burden on me as a parent now to find alternatives for, to fill their time, because that leaves a gap for them in their time. And I have two options. I can just let them fill the gap themselves by telling them go to the backyard and play, or go to the front yard and play, or whatever. Or I can try to find some routine and structure to their gaps. And that's always easier said than done. Do you have any recommendations, especially during summertime now, before we go back to school? What recommendations would you give, any, if any, for parents to fill these gaps with moments or times or things that you think would benefit them with everything that's going on right now?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think it's fair. I think it's very easy for, and I'm not intending to do that. And if it comes across as that, I have practical problems myself. I have children that I need to raise and be a parent for, and so things need to be practical. So I didn't necessarily mean to unplug and throw away, your TV or technology and things like that. I think, I would use the metaphor of, those outlets that have, this, you can put 20 plugs in. Maybe we don't need 20 plugs, maybe we just can use 2 or 3, is my point. And so I think it is important to be plugged in and informed. But again, taking information from reliable places and to the degree that you'd need. I would argue that unplugging is maybe for some people it works. It may or may not be practical for many of us. So I would just say that. So I don't mean unplug. I mean maybe just, like I said, having 1 or 2 plugs in. But in terms of my teacher, Allah preserve him, he said that as a result of the pandemic and the social distancing and quarantine and whatnot, many parents are at home with their children, and they're realizing for the very first time what it means to be a father and a mother. And I just thought it was such a pointed statement, and very, very telling of the state that we're in as parents. And this is across the board. This is not any faith-based discussion necessarily, but for the first time, to my teacher's point, parents are now going to have to be parents. Parenting is very hard, right? If you have been finding it very easy, the likelihood is that you've been doing it very wrong. If you've been finding it overwhelming and extraordinarily difficult, then maybe you're doing it wrong as well. But it's usually kind of vacillates to somewhere in between, day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, depending on the child. and the personality. But I think that it can be argued that for many years, you know, parents have fallen short in some ways of responsibility. And so, you know, this kind of being in quarantine, you know, I've had conversations with people as well who've been in quarantine with their children and figuring out what to do a lot, and that's okay. A lot of the time, that's because we're rediscovering, you know, who we are. And I see it and saw it and continue to see it as an opportunity. And I think that parents and children both have had and continue to have, to a little bit lesser degree now, an opportunity to rediscover one another. You know, personalities and humor and you know, flaws as well. You know, it's an opportunity for us to have a closer look at our children, their strengths, their personalities, their weaknesses. It's an opportunity for us to be a little bit more honest with our children as well. What are our flaws? You know, what are our limitations? What are our ambitions, right? It's a good opportunity, I think, for conversations to happen. I think parenting in the past, and certainly from our prophetic tradition, included a lot of conversation. It included a lot of communication, right? I mean, we have stories from our seerah that talk about how when the Prophet was a single father and he came home from Ta'if, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? You know, to his 4 daughters at home, right? There's conversations that happen there, you know. So, or Asma radiallahu anha, the daughter of Abu Bakr, who brought her father and the Prophet ﷺ food as they were in hiding, right? From marauders or assassins. Yeah, there was a conversation that happened there, right? And then throughout the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, you see so many examples from the hadith of conversations that he had with children. So I would say, you know, to speak to the point that you're asking about, is that parents need to, I think, use this as an opportunity to learn how to have healthy, consistent, and honest conversations with children. And that includes, I think, sharing their own vulnerabilities, because children need to identify with vulnerability, right? They need to identify with stress and how you cope with stress, and conflict and resolution and all of those things. I think children need to be, to different degrees, incorporated. And I think that they have a lot to offer a family. And so, you know, it's a good opportunity to increase conversations with children. It's a good opportunity to get healthy, right? To start eating more at home. It's a great opportunity to begin maybe new exercise habits with the family collectively together. And a lot of people have been doing that. And so my one of my biggest fears, and I've shared this privately, is that parents didn't take advantage of that. And they had this opportunity of 2 or 3 months, and their children are still in part a mystery to them. And worse, in my opinion, they are a mystery to their children still. And, you know, that intimacy is not established, because the likelihood is that over time, just because of the nature of human growth and development and just the aging process, you know, our lives, as though they may be overlapping right now like a Venn diagram, they will begin to drift a little bit as we age away from our children. And you always want there to be some connection. And if you're not investing in that connection, then really no one can be scratching their head or be worried if in adulthood families are separated in that regard. So I think it's a great opportunity. Now that summer is here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has just timed it so that Ramadan came during the pandemic. Summer is here now. So my hope is that families really take advantage of reconnecting to one another in a more intimate way. Allahu a'lam.
Thank you so much, Rehan. So we're going to move right into the last section of our conversation today. But before we do, I just want to give an opportunity to those folks, our viewers that are watching. We would welcome any questions, comments, feedback. In fact, you can, whether you're joining us via Facebook or YouTube, please feel free to go ahead and send us a comment, give us feedback, and we actually are able to pull that up right in front of you on the screen. So if if you have any questions for Rehan, if you have any comments, if you would even like to challenge anything that he said, we welcome it. Please go ahead and leave that in the chat box in YouTube or Facebook, and we'll be happy to share that as we conclude the program. So we're moving towards the last part of the program. And this section, Rehan, we want to talk about the Sanat Prep model. But I want to preface before we begin to talk about the Sanat Prep model is that Sanat Prep model may not be the best option for every family. And I say that in full disclosure as somebody who was a part of founding the institution. So as we begin to talk about the Sanat Prep model, I also want you to be inclusive of what other options are there for families, whether they be private school, public school, homeschooling, or whatever other option may be available for a family. But we do want to learn a little bit more about Sanat Prep and its role in the lives of the families that it has served. So let's talk about that. My first question to you under this section is, how do you plan to make things work for the families that you serve amidst the pandemic? And what were your strengths and challenges that you faced as the leader of the organization?
For us, we have from inception been independent of any parent organization, and strive with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to build from the ground up, not using really any template or any roadmap, and leveraging any relationship with the parent organization. And so even after 9 years, that poses certain challenges. So I think the first challenge that we had was making a very difficult decision, in terms of outwardly difficult decision, to postpone our benefit dinner, which just happened to come at the zenith of when the pandemic was really hitting the height of anxiety, and the decisions to shut things down were happening. And so I think that was one of the challenges that we had, because we're operating a nonprofit organization at the same time we're operating a really unique learning model within Sanat Prep. So we're doing multiple things at the same time. So I think the first challenge that we had was related to our financial well-being. But to the point that I made earlier, we've been taught, alhamdulillah, from our teachers that Muslim-led organizations rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and last. And certainly we use our intellect, and we use our hikmah and all of those resources. So although there was a pause, I think very quickly we pivoted in being creative on how we were going to supplement the decision to postpone our benefit dinner, and really we ended up canceling it. So we became very creative. We used those intellectual resources to be creative on how we will supplement that decision. And we never really regret it, because it was the right decision. And we ultimately know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who provides. And so that was, I think, one of the first challenges that may be unique to us as an independent nonprofit that also operates multiple services, including Sanat Prep Learning Center. I think in terms of the Sanat Prep, alhamdulillah, our model has been, I don't want to present like a humble brag, but our model has been pretty forward-thinking from inception. And so we were in a really good position to really turn around from being on the ground to online. We did it over a weekend. So Friday, we made the decision to shift everything online. And by Monday, we had students at home learning, and it's just that our model. And I think we'll talk about that in a minute, about blended model and learning. So the learning part of it, the delivery of education was, alhamdulillah, for us easy. We were looking at these large institutes like public schools, and who have millions and millions of dollars at their disposal, struggling in many ways. Part of it just the population. But we even heard of small private schools that were these elite private schools with tuition in $20,000, $30,000 a year range, struggling for and how to deliver quality education to their students as well. So, alhamdulillah, I don't think we had much challenge there. I think that we did a good job of educating our team, getting them on the same page, and then really communicating as best as we could to parents and children on how this is going to look and feel. and what the expectations would be of students and families, and also what are the expectations that we're holding for ourselves. So I think we did a good job, alhamdulillah. And our curriculum is unique in that, schools are actually, the children are actually still enrolled in the public school system. So they didn't have to really miss a beat, to be honest with you. So there were challenges that we have and that we continue to have as an organization, as a nonprofit organization that's independent, grassroots, and in terms of scale, it doesn't leverage a parent organization. So there are challenges there. In terms of Sanad prep, enrollment, and going forward, I think we're very, very confident in our delivery and our capabilities. I think the challenge there is, I think, really seeing what parents are deciding to do, and hopefully there is a sense of urgency there on their part to make a decision. And it goes back to the question that you asked earlier. Hopefully there's conversations happening. What is education? What does it need to look like for my son and my daughter? And what is the best platform and institute to offer that? And I think Sanad has positioned itself really well to be a really good option for many families and children.
So piggybacking off of what you just said, I know that even as a parent who's been actually a part of, and as a professional who's been a part of education, that there still tends to be a lot of confusion with terminology and verbiage in education. So it seems like there's 100 new ways for kids to be educated now, from homeschooling to online learning to virtual school to blended learning. So there's a lot of different models of education out there, and it seems like that the trend seems to just be moving towards a peak, given the circumstances with the pandemic. So my question to you the next question is, if you can help us understand the difference between homeschooling, virtual or online schooling, and blended learning.
Yeah. Well, I know that we wanna wrap up before 1 p.m. So I'm gonna give an abridged version answer to this question, with the expectation that we can continue this dialogue in future conversations, and people are certainly welcome to follow up and ask questions by email or through the chat. But just generally speaking, I think it goes to make it in the most simplest terms, is there's a really easy psychology concept called locus of control, and it's related to another area, but I'm going to apply it to education. So I think that when it comes to education, we have to see where in our child's learning institute, right? When I say learning institute, I'm using kind of that generic term to reference whether it's a public school, a private school, a home school, an Islamic school, or whatever the case may be, a Montessori. Where is the locus of control in terms of the education model there, right? In a traditional model, you will have a teacher at the front of a classroom and a child at the rear, and there is kind of these two separate locuses, and education happens somewhere in between. And then you have other models that attempt to have a different setup. What Sanad has tried to do from the very beginning is center our model on the child, and really more intimately on the soul of that child. So what we've called from day one a soul-centered model, that when we looked at how we were going to build a place of learning for a child, we were going to build it around the child's needs, cognitive, emotional, and spiritual, and really in reverse order, spiritual, emotional, and cognitive. That was how we started. And so to do that, we had to really build around that and look at prophetic tradition and look at practical pedagogies and things like that were Montessori, homeschooling, public school, all of these different things. So the difference, right, to your question, the differences between those is, where is the locus of control, right? Where is the the centeredness of the model? Is it teacher-centered? Is it student-centered? Is it soul-centered? Or is it cognitive-centered? These are all the things that I think one needs to look at. And if you look at the things that you referenced here, homeschooling, online, virtual, and blended, they each will have a different mode, and they'll each will have a different place. And so what our model is really a blended model, and a blended model, which is a soul-centered blended model. And so when you come into our space, there's a lot of nuances to our learning model as well. One is that our students remain enrolled in the public school system. So we use the backbone that is already established there in terms of curriculum and accreditation and all of that. However, we have built around that. And what we built around that is this soul-centered model. So what you'll find in grades kindergarten 1, 2, that the model has a learning coach that is holding both hands of the child in the learning process. And as they matriculate, right, from lower elementary to upper elementary, you get a little bit moments where both hands are guiding the child, and sometimes there's a hands-off moment, right? And then as they get into middle school, then perhaps the learning coach just has one hand guiding the child. And then as they get into the high school years, the learning coach is more of practically speaking, a coach, a guide, an advisor, a support, and the evolution that happens, and that what we've seen happen now with graduating students, is that the child becomes a self-directed learner, right? And that, like what Mr. Dobson says in her book, is a wonder to behold, right? And that's what we need to create. That's what your child's school needs to create. Whatever it is, it needs to produce, in dunyawi terms, a self-directed learner, right? A self-inspired learner, an intrinsically motivated learner, as somebody who not only desires to pursue knowledge, but has the tools to identify where to find that knowledge and how to begin the process of acquiring that knowledge. That's what you want to produce outwardly. For Muslim families and people of faith in general, we want to do something a little bit deeper than that as well. We want to create morally inspired children, emotionally sound students, and spiritually centered students as well. And so that would be the next question, if not the first question to ask: does the school that my child attend do that, right? And it goes back to our redefinition of knowledge and education and schooling. But the reality is, right, if we're all very honest with ourselves, is that we are entrusting for a large portion of the day a school to educate our children. If our definition of education is just restricted to the intellect or cognition, then what happens to the 90% of the child, right? And really, the majority of the child and the primary essence of the child, the soul of the child. What are we doing to compensate? And maybe families are, right? There are families that have a great family structure, right? A great emotional and spiritual tarbiyah at home and foundation, and without any real gap. So the school hands them off, and then the mother and the father takes the child in, and they're involved and engaged, right? For many families, that's a challenge because of life, because of work, because of other children in the home, whatever the case may be. So Sana has a place where you really don't have to hand off, and you really don't have to make a sacrifice in that regard. And I think that's what families really need to look at is, and then the other component would be obviously like the personality of the child and the needs of the child, right? But generally speaking, a family should look at where is the locus, where is the center of control or attention and concern for my child's school, okay? And look at the model and look at it, evaluate it and research it. And then also look at how are they serving not just the intellectual needs of my child, but the emotional and the spiritual needs of my child as well. And what you want to find is a place that can do as much of those things as possible for your child. Because at the end of the day, and maybe I might be jumping ahead, but at the end of the day, we're responsible for, for the spiritual salvation of a human being that's been entrusted to us. So we absolutely need to educate them and make sure that they're successful in life and that they're good citizens and that they offer their fullest potential to humanity. But we also have to ensure that they live up to their fullest spiritual potential as well. And if our schools are not going to do that, then we certainly need to supplement it with something at home or in the community. And ideally, an institute should be doing both of those things. But absent that, then certainly families need to be able to offer something in support. So it's a primary responsibility, I believe. Allahu Akbar.
Thank you so much, Rehan. So we are running out of time. I'm sure we can go on and ask you a lot more questions. There was one last question to clarify a little bit on the blended learning model, but I think you've spoken quite a bit. So on the Sanad Prep model and the different models. So I would like to keep the information. I would like to keep within our parameters of our time and respect the time limit. So we can add
into that if you like, just in the last minute that we have.
So we do have a question actually from Brother Atif Ali. I'm going to actually put that on the board for you to look at, and I'm going to read it out. And so anybody who may have questions right now, I encourage you to please go ahead and post them right now, whether you're joining us via Facebook or YouTube. Please go ahead and ask your questions, and we'll try our best to answer them in the next few minutes, and then inshallah conclude by 1 or 1:05. Rehan, were you saying something?
No, I was going to see the question that Brother Atif had.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the question that's come up. The question says, for the upcoming school year, is there a plan for Sanad Prep to provide 100% virtual education e-learning for those students who may prefer that option?
It's a good question. We asked, I think a couple of people have asked that already. Our plan right now is to hopefully be on the ground. Our model can operate very fluidly, whether it's on the ground or online. However, it's always advantageous to have the intimacy of the human interaction between teacher and student. So we are following all the guidelines, and we're going to keep informed and see how things progress. One of the things that's really great about Sanad Prep is that our model is actually already has a lot of social distancing elements in place. So there's a very high likelihood that we'll be able to operate relatively normally with social distancing measures in place on the ground here from our location. What are those kind of principles that we have here? We have very small class sizes. Our student to teacher ratio is typically 5 to 1, or somewhere in between 5 to 10 to 1. So we're already very small. Our students have very large desks, right, that already put them approximately 6 feet away from each other. We have a small school population as well, right? And our center is set up so it's kind of like an open concept, and it feels very much like a home. And so, we're able to maintain a high standard of cleanliness. We're able to maintain a great degree of social distancing practices here. So for that reason, we anticipate being on the ground. But obviously, if something happens where the pandemic, God forbid, there's an uptick in cases and whatnot, and quarantine is mandated, then we've certainly established a precedent this year to be able to do Sanad Prep online. So our plan is to be on the ground, but we're prepared to be online if needed. And so that's kind of how we're operating. Our expectation right now is to be able to operate because of the size of our student population, the size of our class, and we feel that we can manage it. But again, everything will be predicated on safety and the guidelines by the CDC and the city.
So I'm going to ask you a follow-up question to that, actually. Let's say that there's a family who actually doesn't live in Miami, in the city of Miami. And I'm asking this question because when Sanad Prep went online, we actually opened up select classes of Sanad Prep to families all over the world. And we actually saw families join us from outside of Florida, in fact, outside of the United States of America, to join our science classes, our social studies, our math, our history, and whatnot. So my follow-up question to you is that option going to be available for families in case they may not be in this city and are unable to attend Sanad Prep for whatever reason it may be, because they can't travel to it or whatever? Is Sanad looking to offer education to children who may be outside of Florida?
Yeah. Well, our hope is that we have everyone who is in South Florida certainly consider Sunnah Prep and enroll. Admissions are currently open. So everyone who is in Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties, if you have school-age children, we're really, really encouraging you to look into Sunnah Prep. Admission is not guaranteed like other places. So if you are even a little bit interested, we encourage you to apply and go through the interview process and other things. So certainly if you're in the Tri-County area of South Florida, consider coming to the facility and being on the ground with us. If you're outside of that geographic region, then yeah, what we did this year during the pandemic was we're not first responders. We were not, on the front lines trying to save people in terms of their health. But we really had a really honest discussion about what can we offer, what can we do in terms of philanthropy and humanitarian effort in this age. And so what we decided to do is that a lot of families, or obviously everybody, was educating from home for the first time. We had been doing it for almost a decade, but a lot of families were struggling and they just needed some support. So what we did was offer some select classes free online in history, in the sacred sciences, and math, and other areas from lower elementary through high school. And we opened those up for free. People registered for them, and they just provided a little bit of support for a mother or father at home who is doing homeschooling for the first time. And I think a lot of people benefited. We had families join from Amman, Jordan, from DC, Virginia, certainly from Florida. So it felt good to be able to offer something that we have been prepared to offer because of the decade experience that we have. So we're planning to do some mode of that for this upcoming academic year. And we're restricting it to a very niche group that will fit a certain criterion that we know we can offer a very high quality service to them. We never just do things on good intentions because they feel good. We want to make sure that we do it at a high quality. So we are hoping to have some type of a beta or a pilot program for Sunnah Prep Online, where students that fit certain parameters can enroll and we can serve their needs. We'll see how that goes. I know Sister Fariza is working on that. We'll be sharing some more information on that. Our first priority right now is to get everyone in the Tri-County area to consider enrolling and to apply and to get the enrollment for on-the-ground students done, and then kind of launch the Sunnah Prep Online initiative. It may or may not be as robust as a student just being at home and being a full-time Sunnah Prep student. It may be a supplement to something they're already doing. It may just be the sacred sciences as well, where we just want to make sure that we're able to do it well. But to the questioners, the question, we are exploring the idea of offering Sunnah Prep online. And just to open the door a little bit on that, Sunnah Prep as part of Sunnah Trust Foundation, and our foundation's goal is to really have centers like our own in other cities throughout the country. So, and including all or some of the services that we offer, including Sunnah Prep. So this is our roadmap into that direction, where we're inviting families that may already be homeschooling through a district program or a virtual program. That will be a good fit for us. If they're on the East Coast, that would be a good fit for us. So this is a good avenue into that. And certainly if there's somebody watching in a community that is looking to establish a soul-centered blended model that's accredited and that uses the backbone of the public school system, then we're open to visiting your community and speaking to you. But we've always operated like a social business startup, so things evolve fast. And so I would just say if people are interested in Sunnah Prep Online or having Sunnah Prep be in their city or enrolling in the on-the-ground initiative here, join our social media, join our newsletter, stay informed, continue to support our work so we can continue this effort, inshallah.
Okay, so it's 1:05. We've gone over 5 minutes. I would like to conclude the program and not keep our viewers waiting too long. So unless, Rehan, you have any concluding remarks, I would like to make my concluding remarks and we can end the program. I do not see any more questions that have come in the chat box. So Sister Fariza, our SP coordinator, has put in her information on Facebook. Please feel free to reach out to her. You can contact her to ask any questions, give feedback, comments, concerns you may have about Sanat Preparatory, or even generally about our services, and she will get back to you aptly. So,
I would just add, yeah, I would just say, like, in terms of last comment, that families, let us all, including the fakir and my family, take advantage of this opportunity to really do a reset on our, and we may not need to change much, but just an introspective, a reevaluation of our value-based system, include in that conversation and introspection, what is schooling and education and knowledge mean, and how does it need to be defined, or how can it be defined? I would certainly invite everyone to consider Sanat Prep. I can refer people to the recent blog that we posted on our blog that talks about a lot of these ideas and gives parents a roadmap into how to begin the process of asking the questions that they need to ask for their children's education. Certainly, we invite families to consider Sanat Prep, but it really, this is not a commercial for Sanat Prep. We really just want families to settle, and relax, and understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with them, is with their children, as long as they have sincerity and they follow the parameters that we've been taught in our tradition, which are to make consultation, to give your ear to people of knowledge, not just anybody, right? To not be swayed by fear-mongering or external anxieties. So I would just encourage mothers and fathers to be settled, to be reflective, to solicit valid sources for their knowledge and their information and their decision-making process. Rely on informed opinion. Rely on people who are experienced in the field. Don't just go on a blog entry, or don't just go on hearsay, or don't just go on what people in a particular socioeconomic bracket are doing or not doing. I think every one of us needs to evaluate what we're doing for our children on a very personal level. It's like my teacher said from the Habaib, that they would walk, and they were in a very pious environment. Nonetheless, when they would leave their homes, they would walk with their children in their hand, so that their children would not be distracted or persuaded by things. And meaning that they were not like holding them like hostage, but metaphorically speaking, that they would keep their hands on their children. In their home, they would play with them. They would be in their company. They would be the primary educator for their children always. So these are just moments that I think that we should take advantage of and reflect. And I hope that in that process, that you have a moment where you'll consider Sanat Prep as an option for your children. And whether or not it be a perfect fit or not, that's something that can be evaluated. But I do think that our ask of every family is that they just use this moment and these moments to reflect on their decisions, on their values, on their principles, on their schooling and their priorities. And may Allah guide them and us always to success in that which is most pleasing to Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I appreciate you letting me say those last few words.
No problem. So with that, I will conclude the program with concluding remarks. So the program comes to a close. We would like to thank all of you, the viewers who joined us this afternoon. If you are going to be watching this as a recorded video on our Facebook or YouTube channel, please know that we are happy to receive your comments, your concerns, your feedback, your questions. We really hope that you enjoyed today's conversation with our guest speaker, Rehan Mirza, on the new normal of education. If you did, please make sure to subscribe, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or subscribe to our newsletter by visiting our website. The website address is right below there. You can see it. I also want to remind our viewers that our application period is open right now for Sanat Preparatory. So if you guys are interested in enrolling your child for the next academic year in Sanat Prep, the enrollment and application period is open. Obviously, submitting an application does not guarantee enrollment, but we nevertheless encourage you to look into the program, visit our website, and look into the program. If you did not like anything that was discussed, or if you have feedback for us to improve our program, we still welcome your feedback. So please make sure, no matter what, that you contact us. You can contact Sister Fariza at fariza@sanatrust.org, or you can send an email to me directly at my email address, which is attiqa, my first name, atika at sanatrust.org. So with that, we like to conclude. Thank you so much for joining us today. We wish you a wonderful rest of the afternoon and a wonderful weekend. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.